we're going to go straight out to the 12th Man Technology Hotline for our weekly chat where we dive in the trenches with Cole Kubelik, former Auburn center and current ESPN and SEC network analyst. Hey, Cole, happy Tuesday. How's it going?
Good morning, Leah. Doing well. Thank you very much.
Well, excited to have you here with us as usual. Cole, coming off a weekend in Oxford that ended up in Will Muschamp getting fired, and I guess we'll start there. At TexAgs, we've kind of been speculating that maybe some coaches would get a pass in 2020 just based on programs having to justify these multi-million-dollar buyouts, but that didn't seem to be the case with the Gamecocks. What was your reaction to South Carolina parting ways with Will Muschamp over the weekend?
I knew there had been some discussion around it. I had been hearing about it really since last year. I think he felt he needed that game. I think a lot of people felt he needed that game. And I was kind of in line with your thinking that there just wasn't going to be a way for a university that was going to face a $50 million shortfall to be able to pull the trigger on potentially a $13 million buyout. Now, I think if you read between the lines and read some of the wording that they've agreed to part ways, that tells me that maybe there was agreement upon a smaller settlement, a different number than the 75% that was left of his remaining contract. But even still, if you're talking about 8, 9, 6, 11 to get rid of him, it's a lot based on everything else that's happening right now. And who you're going to be able to go get and who's going to be available, and then how much are you really going to be able to offer on top of that after the buyout. But as we know in collegiate athletics, if the right people step up and the right people say it's time and the right people pull their checkbooks out, you can go make something like this happen. So it's unfortunate for Will. Obviously, I think it was probably time. Things were not heading the direction that they needed to, but I feel like that's a good staff. I feel like he's a good coach. He's a great guy. And I think people get a little bit consumed with how they see him get upset with officials on the sideline. That's not really who he is on a day-to-day basis. But I'll be interested to see which direction they go next because I don't know exactly what their options are going to be. I know who's on their wish list, but I don't know if all of those are necessarily going to be available.
And Cole, when I think about the rest of the SEC too, I think about another slate of coaches that might be on the hot seat right now. I think of Gus Malzahn. I think of Jeremy Pruitt. I think of Derek Mason. Are there any other moves that you could see being made in the SEC this year? Maybe ADs starting to make moves on guys that they know that they want and maybe stop delaying the inevitable.
Yeah, if Tennessee makes a move on Jeremy Pruitt, then I think they just don't really care about having a winning program anytime soon, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if you're going to bring in a new coach and he's going to come in on a total rebuild, you've got to give him some time. I mean, look what's happening with Jimbo Fisher. And, I mean, now all of a sudden you're getting a great year, a fantastic season, and there were people that were complaining the last 2 years at certain points in time. So you've got to give these coaches time to get things right, to make sure they've got the right kind of players, the players they want and need, and maybe even sometimes get their staff right. And sometimes you got to retool things because they don't always go exactly the way that you sort of figured that they would. I think the Derek Mason thing is intriguing. It's obviously not going well this year, but Vanderbilt just has a different mindset than every other SEC program. They don't put the resources into it. They don't seem to have as much passion about it. And I'm not talking about the fan base. I'm talking about the people who run it. So I don't know if that's one that seems realistic. Gus Malzahn is safe. He won't be gone this year. I don't think that's even really something that'll be a real point of conversation moving forward. Now, you drop the next two to Tennessee and Mississippi State, maybe some people start to have a discussion or two, but I don't really think that's going to happen. So I think other than Vanderbilt being a slight possibility, I think this is probably it this year in the SEC.
Well, Cole, smaller slate of games over this weekend, only 6 teams to evaluate here, but what were some of your biggest takeaways from this weekend in the SEC, and who stood out to you specifically?
You have to start with Matt Corral and that Ole Miss offense.
Sure.
I mean, that was remarkable, unbelievable to be able to have the accuracy that he had down the field, attacking deep balls, and for them to still be able to. I mean, they're the number one rushing offense in the league. Not many people know about that. Now they're the worst rush defense in the league at the same time. So I guess when you watch them play, 2 things stick out. One, that offense is dynamic. They have playmakers. Jerion Ely doesn't get enough credit as a tailback. Obviously, you have the number one receiver in the league as well, and quarterback that's doing special things. The offensive line deserves a little bit more credit if you're talking about Ole Miss. But then defensively, they just can't. I mean, they can't get a stop, any stops. They did get one late, too late, really, against South Carolina that were somewhat self-inflicted. But it's amazing to see a team that can just be that high-powered, that high-octane offensively, and not be able to come up with anything on defense. I mean, it's rough to watch. I think you look at how impressive Florida is. To have that break that they had, I mean, most people, I think, feel the way that I did, that they were going to come back against Missouri. It was probably going to be sluggish. It wasn't going to look great. And then all of a sudden they pound Missouri, they put it on Georgia, and then they go handle Arkansas and put 63 points on them. So just not only what they're doing and what Kyle Trask is doing and the amount of playmakers that they have, but the fact that they had the break that they did over 20 days and then they were able to come back and just not miss a beat. And hey, that helps A&M's resume. That I think the better Florida does, the more intriguing A&M becomes, because now you're talking about having maybe the best individual win other than Notre Dame knocking off Clemson in all college football. So I still think Alabama has the best resume, but I mean you could make an argument because of who wasn't in the game when Notre Dame played Clemson that A&M has the single best win this year in college football. So. It was definitely a weird weekend. Like you said, it was a light weekend, but definitely one that was still enjoyable because we had college football.
Cole Kubelik with us on the 12th Man Technology Hotline. Cole, I think you're absolutely right. And as we kind of bring this back to College Station and we look at the postponement of A&M and Ole Miss as expected, Jimbo Fisher confirmed to us yesterday that there's just one positive case on the team right now, but the active player number is in the 40s, and it was really easy for A&M to fall below that 53-man threshold. And the contact tracing has obviously posed some challenges for Texas A&M, and now they're missing the second straight week after having some momentum rolling with a really complete game in Columbia. So if you're A&M, what are the positives and the negatives of now having this second week away?
Well, I think if you look at the advantages, you number one, you look at what we just talked about with Florida. So it doesn't automatically mean that you're not going to come back and play great football. I think number two, you look at, we all talked about this 10-game SEC season, how brutal it was going to be, especially with the opt-outs, the guys deciding not to play, some of them being late. That's going to hurt your depth. Well, now you get some rest, and you get a chance to sort of refuel, regroup, and really have an opportunity to get yourself prepared to come finish strong. Obviously, and then on the flip side of that, the downside would be chemistry, feel, rhythm. You don't really want to sit out when you're playing at a high level. You want to keep going. You want to get back on the field as quickly as you can because that's just that your confidence is so high. But I think with the leadership that team has, starting at quarterback, up front on that offensive line, in the backfield with Spiller, look at the way the defensive line's playing. I think that you got enough guys there that understand how it's supposed to be, what it's supposed to look like, the work that's supposed to go into it, that I wouldn't expect much of a dip when A&M gets back on the field.
Yeah, Cole, you said last week on our show that football players are creatures of habit. So I'm curious, how does a team that is likely to be favored in every game from here on out continue to keep their foot on the gas?
Well, it's just that you know the habits that got you there, so you continue to stick with them, and you continue to sort of live by those mottos. And whatever it was that worked before, continue to utilize that, and then continue to add and subtract what you need and what you don't need. What works, go with it. You'll find ways to make it different, make it more creative, whether that's with emotion or a different formation or different personnel groupings, or if some doesn't work, now's the time to get rid of it. If you're not having success with a play, with a route, with a blitz package, the coverage, just dump it and try to move forward with everything else that you're doing well. But those practice habits have to stay the same. The time that you're devoting to it has to stay the same and probably grow. And you have to know this is what made us what we are. And if we get away from that, we're not going to meet our goals. We're not going to win the rest of our games.
And Cole, as we kind of look big picture here, this is kind of a two-part question. With A&M having LSU, Auburn, Tennessee, and Ole Miss remaining on their schedule, who maybe scares you the most or poses the biggest threat? And then when we look even bigger picture, who do you think would pose the biggest threat to A&M's college football playoff hopes at this point?
I think the playoff hopes are, there's a large group of teams there because I think once you get outside of Tier 1, which I don't even know if we know exactly all of who belongs in Tier 1 right now. I think you would put Bama, you would put Ohio State. A lot of people would put Notre Dame. I still have some questions and concerns about Notre Dame. I think a lot of people would still place Clemson there. But then it gets really crowded after that. And I think Florida's in there next. A&M's in there next. A lot of people are going to go Oregon. Some people are going to go BYU. Some people might go Cincinnati. I think it gets extremely crowded there at sort of Tier 2. So you're probably going to need some help. You're probably going to need some teams to drop another game. And then you begin to look at some of the problems, like what if Florida were to knock off Alabama in the SEC championship game? What if Clemson beats Notre Dame in the ACC championship game? Those splits, I think, would be really bad for Texas A&M, because now you've got the committee's going to have to start making decisions, and those are decisions that I think if you're an A&M fan, you would want to have made for you. If you're an A&M fan right now, you want Alabama to go undefeated. That makes your only loss look great. It would be the best loss that anybody has on their resume, and that sounds silly, but I mean I've been in that room in Grapevine, Texas, and done the mock committee selection, so I know that that's a conversation that happens. Quality losses are something that's weighed, that's discussed and talked about. And then I think, too, you want Notre Dame to go ahead and win out. And if they play Clemson again, beat Clemson again, because you don't want that to have to be a decision. And get Bama in, get Notre Dame in, even if you want to go ahead and let Ohio State be undefeated and get them in, then you want to be that other team. And you want to be able to say, look, Florida's a team that you're talking about, but they just lost to Alabama again. We beat Florida. We're ahead of them. We deserve to be in. Who else are you going to go with? A Clemson team that lost to the same team twice? Why would you put them in and have them potentially go play Notre Dame again, even the semifinals or the finals, and lose for the third time? Nobody wants to see that. And you can look at BYU and say, we've got a better resume, we've got a better schedule. So you're a better football team, more talented than the Cincinnati. And that to me is probably the path for A&M to get in.
Last thing, Cole, before we let you go.
Most dangerous team left, I actually think Ole Miss. Because when Ole Miss gets going and they get their style of game going, there are not a lot of teams that are comfortable playing that way. And South Carolina's game plan was about 95% effective on offense and should have been enough to win that game, and it wasn't. I mean, look what Alabama had to do to go win that game. Kentucky's game plan on offense was exactly what they wanted it to be against Ole Miss. They ran for 400 yards. And they found a way to lose that game. You do not want to get in a track meet with Ole Miss, because it only takes one or two mistakes late, and all of a sudden you can find yourself losing that football game. A&M obviously has something that I guess it's funny. Tom and I were talking about that game Saturday night before, and he was like, "Man, don't you think everybody's just going to load up on the under because?" South Carolina is pretty much dedicated. They told us they're going to play ground and pound. They're going to go out there and try to milk the clock. They're going to try to keep possession. And I'm thinking, well, no, because Ole Miss can't stop them. So just because you run the ball doesn't mean you're eating a lot of clock. It just means it takes 6 or 7 plays as opposed to 2 or 3 plays to go get a touchdown. It's still difficult to actually run clock against Ole Miss because their defense is that bad.
Really good point, Cole. Real quick before we let you go, I know it's Tuesday. I know it's still a little bit early, but Week 9 in the SEC, what has your attention? What are you looking forward to about this weekend in college football?
I mean, I'm going to be on the Alabama game, so, I want to see how they look after 2 weeks off. We talked about it with A&M. We mentioned how Florida looked. Does Alabama come back and look like the team that we all thought they were going in 2 weeks ago when we saw them play? Is this going to be beneficial for them? Is this going to be a headache for them? Are they going to find extra guys that can maybe help them down the stretch? I think that's something that I'm obviously looking forward to. And then to the other teams that had breaks. I mean, we've had so many teams that we hadn't seen play. Does Auburn have something going on offense now? Can they find a way to be a little bit more consistent there? There's going to be some teams that get healthy. You look at that Auburn defensive front. That's a group that's going to be a little bit healthier. The Georgia quarterback situation is something that I'm looking at. Are they going to finally make that change and let JT Daniels go be the guy? So those are some of the bigger picture things I think I'm paying attention to this weekend.
Cole, really appreciate the time as always. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Leah. Good catching up with you.